Welcome back to Screentop 101. I'm Jack Rosetree, and now I'm going to talk about containers and drop zones. Containers are really just spaces on your tabletop that can contain other things, even other containers. A really common example is going to be your player hands. So in this game, I've got a player hand on the left for the blue player and a player hand on the right for the red player. I'm sitting in the blue player's seat, so if I draw some cards into that hand, I can see and read them. If I draw cards into the red player's hand, I cannot see them. That gets into permissions, which we'll talk about later, but for now we're just going to create a basic drop zone. So we're going to go into components, we're going to click that plus and select container and create, and now we've got a new container down at the bottom of our list. We're going to name it sideboard. And it's got a lot of similar options to tiles, so anything that you can do to a tile, you can do to this, with the exception that containers do not have backs. So you're not going to worry about anything on the back side of the container, flipping it over, that sort of thing. Let's set this to 1200, and let's give this a color. Let's go into the variant. Let's give it kind of a reddish color for the red player. All right, so now we've got our container. We're going to go into our chest. We're going to add it to our tabletop by selecting it and dropping it there. So it's right next to our player hand for the red player. And then we're going to look at the drop zone. So the drop zone initially on any container is going to be the grid, and it's not going to have any specific components that it cares about. Literally anything can be dropped on this grid. So we've got this die, I can put it up here. We've got this counter, I can put it down here. We've got this card, I can put it over here. And if I pick up the container, I can drag around all of the stuff together. Now let's say that we only want the container to contain letter cards. We can actually go into the drop zone, and there's this section called child components, and what that means is those are the things that can be attached to that container. So in this case, I can say letters, save, and now this K can be dropped in here, this Z can be dropped in here. But if I try to move either the die or the counter over it, I can drop it on top, but it is not inside that container. So if I pick up that container and drag it away, that stuff will not go with it. And then there are some options for how small your grid is, how big it is, that sort of thing. But the other thing to consider is that you can actually add additional drop zones. So let's say that we have this drop zone for letters, and we want a new drop zone for specifically dice. We can do that, and we can change the child component to dice. And you know what? Let's pretend that the counter also looks like a die, so we'll add that as well. And now this particular part of the drop zone only cares about dice and counters. It doesn't care about letters. And what that means for most things is that you're going to drop dice and counters onto the same grid as you're dropping letters. But because one of the drop zones is happening before the other, you will always have one component on top of the other, which is the dice will always be above the letters, even if you drop them later. And that's a way that you can fiddle with transparencies, how cards stack, that sort of thing. There's some other options that we can get into later, but that's just basically how containers work. The player hand can also go into this container when we add it as a child. So let's say in addition to letters, we also want to be able to add player hands. Now this player hand can be part of this container. And then if, for instance, we go into this container and we say, all right, this container belongs to the red player. And also, the view policy is that only seats can see that container. Now, I'm in the blue seat. I cannot see what's in this container anymore. I can still manipulate it, so let's change that. We can go to interact policy, and we can say allow seats. And now, I can't interact with this container at all. If I leave my seat and I join the red seat, now I can see and interact with this stuff. And let's say that we've got a judge. We want the judge to also be able to do these things. So we go to seats, we select judge, and now if I'm sitting in the judge's seat, I can also see and interact with this stuff. And then permissions wise, there's also the ability to deny all or deny seats, which just means that whoever is listed there can't interact with it, or nobody can interact with it. If you have a particular tile that you never want to move, that's an option. And that's basically it for containers. We're going to do a little bit more specific stuff later on, but that should get you going. Honestly, between tiles and containers, 90% of most games are ready to be built. Dice are pretty straightforward. We're going to get into those and counters next. And those are mostly function the same way that tiles and containers do, with a few unique twists. So hope to see you then.